The first rifle crack rolled across Shadow Lake like thunder caught between red sandstone walls. A heartbeat later, Iris Calder's horse screamed in terror and stumbled into the muddy shallows, throwing her forward as bullets tore the water apart. The stolen Mercury purchase ledgers ripped free from her hands, their pages scattering across the lake like exposed sins as she fought to stay above the rising water. Behind her, 3 riders from the Iron Trace drove their mounts down the rocky slope, rifles flashing beneath the brutal August sun of 1881. Iris had known this reckoning would come the moment she uncovered those damning records spread across Vance Blackmore's desk. Proof that women across the territory branded as barren had in truth been systematically poisoned by mercury runoff from his mines. The lake swallowed her. Her soaked riding dress dragged her downward as her lungs burned. She broke the surface, coughing gunfire cracking around her as water exploded in violent bursts. Through the chaos, she saw movement on the far shore, a lone Apache warrior on a paint horse slipping from the willows with silent purpose. He crossed the mud flats with fluid precision and reached her as a second volley ripped the water open. Without hesitation, he slid from his horse into the lake beside her, blade flashing as he cut away the heaviest folds of her dress. 3 shooters on the ridge, he said evenly, his dark eyes steady despite bullets striking close enough to sting. Can you reach that fallen cottonwood? Iris nodded, forcing her arms to obey as she followed him toward the massive tree toppled into the lake. The bark scraped her palms as she pressed herself against it, acutely aware of the man beside her. His controlled strength, the old scars mapped across his skin, the discipline of someone shaped by survival. Why are you helping me? She gasped between shots. He studied her face the way a tracker reads dangerous ground. Men who shoot at women, carrying papers, usually fear what those papers reveal. The warrior Rokan, she would later learn, rose just enough to fire 3 deliberate shots toward the ridge. One rider screamed and fell from his saddle. The other 2 turned back, apparently deciding their wages were not worth dying for. As the echoes faded, Iris found herself staring at her rescuer. He appeared around 35, bearing the hardened features of someone who had lived through the Apache Wars. A burn scar crossed his ribs beneath a torn cavalry shirt, and every movement carried the careful economy of a man who wasted nothing, not motion, not breath. He gestured toward the documents floating among the cattails. Those papers, he said, are they worth more than your life? Iris followed his gaze as the evidence of Blackmore's crimes slowly sank beneath the murky surface. Proof that the Ashwater widows, 17 women, had lost their children not to fate or curse, but to deliberate poisoning. The truth hung between them like smoke from a funeral pyre. Rokan's face remained calm, but something shifted in his eyes. Including you, he said quietly. It was not a question. Iris nodded, her throat tightening. The memory of 2 miscarriages cut fresh the whispers, the shame, the slow collapse of a marriage that could not survive repeated loss. Then we gather what remains, Rokan said already, moving toward the scattered pages. And we make sure the truth reaches people who cannot bury it. 3 days later, Dr. Alton Greaves arrived at the Apache camp as evening fires flickered to life along the lake. His medical bag hung from hands marked by decades of frontier work. At 52, Greaves carried the calm authority of a man who had seen every shape of suffering and learned to meet it without hesitation. Let me see that graze, he said to Rokan, settling beside the warrior's lodge with the ease of long acquaintance. Iris watched as the doctor cleaned and stitched the wound with steady precision. Around them, nearly 30 lodges stood arranged along the shore. Children played between them, while women worked nearby, but Iris noticed the signs of constant readiness, weapons always within reach. Horses kept saddled, men moving with the alert stillness of soldiers. Greaves treats all people the same, explained Sahra, an elderly woman who introduced herself as Rokan's grandmother. When spotted fever came 3 winters ago, he stayed with us for weeks. Took no payment, only asked that we share what we know of healing. When the stitching was done, Iris spread the salvaged documents on a blanket by the fire. Even damaged the records told a brutal story. 3 years of mercury purchases, she said, pointing to the columns. Enough to poison thousands of tons of ore. All dumped straight into Willow Creek. Greaves studied the figures, his expression darkening. Sweet Jesus. That explains everything. The miscarriages, the birth defects, the nerve damage downstream. There's more, Iris said, producing another bundle. Payment records, bribes. She laid them out carefully. Sheriff Ward Hensley has been taking regular consulting fees from Blackmore. So has Judge Corbin Slate and at least 3 territorial legislators. Silence settled over the fire as the weight of corruption revealed itself heavy as the lake water that had nearly claimed her life. They were still weighing the evidence late into the night when a lone figure appeared at the edge of the firelight. Bram Holden stopped just beyond the glow hat clenched tightly between his hands. He looked no older than 30, with sun-worn skin, calloused fingers, and the plain, honest bearing of a man who made his living from the land. Iris Calder recognized him immediately, one of the men who had hauled tailings for Vance Blackmore's operation. "Miss Calder," he said, voice tight. "I need to confess something." He swallowed hard. "I've been working for Blackmore, hauling poisoned waste to dumping grounds all across the territory." He hesitated, eyes fixed on the dirt. "I kept telling myself it was just a job. Just freight." His voice broke. "But after what happened to my wife, I can't lie to myself anymore." Iris saw real agony crease his face. "She lost a child last spring," Bram continued. "3rd miscarriage in 2 years. The doctor said it was God's will." His hands trembled. "Now I know better. I'm starting to believe it was my own hands that poisoned the water she drank." He pulled a folded receipt from inside his shirt and held it out. "I found this in tomorrow's load. Dates, locations. Every one of them lines up with the worst contamination sites we know about. I can't carry this on my soul any longer." Iris took the paper. Blackmore's seal marked the page, his unmistakable handwriting, listing payments for dumping waste where it would bleed directly into creeks and wells. It wasn't negligence, it was strategy. A calculated campaign of destruction aimed at entire communities. "Why come forward now?" Rokan asked. Bram's face collapsed under the weight of his guilt. "Because I finally understood what I've been doing. I've been delivering death to every water source in this land." He looked around the circle. "My wife, your people, every family downstream. We were all drinking poison because of what I hauled for Blackmore." The words settled heavily like smoke that refused to lift. Iris felt anger toward the man who had played a role in so much suffering, but also pity for the grief etched into him and hope that his confession might finally crack the case wide open. "I'll testify," Bram said, voice firm now. "Whatever it takes to set this right. I'll do it." As the fire burned down and people drifted toward their lodges, Rokan walked Iris to the small shelter prepared for her. The night air was cool and clean, scented with sage and wood smoke, a sharp contrast to the poisoned breath of Willow Springs. "They will come for you at first light," he said quietly. "Blackmore cannot allow those papers to reach the territorial authorities." Iris nodded. "I can leave. Find another place to hide until numb." The word was final. "You are under the protection of the Red Hollow Circle now," Rokan said. "My people have voted. The decision was unanimous." She studied him in the starlight, seeing the burden of leadership in his straight posture and steady eyes. This was not one man's choice. It was the will of an entire community. "Why?" she asked softly. "You barely know me." Rokan turned his gaze toward the moonlit surface of Shadow Lake. When he spoke, his voice carried the measured weight of ceremony. "In my Tipi, he said you would be sheltered not by magic, not by medicine, but by safety, by warmth, by food, by people who believe justice is worth defending." The offer was not romantic. It was sanctuary, belonging when her own world had cast her aside. Iris felt tears sting her eyes as she understood what he was truly giving her, Not love, but alliance. Your people don't know me, she whispered. They know courage when they see it, he replied. And they know the spirits sometimes send help in unexpected forms. His gaze met hers. We are all broken in some way, Iris Calder. What matters is whether we let that breaking destroy us or shape us into something stronger. Before dawn, the thunder of hooves shattered the quiet. Iris jolted awake inside the borrowed shelter, her body tightening with instinct. Around her, the Apache camp stirred into motion, not with panic, but with practiced precision, born of long familiarity with danger. Roken appeared at the entrance, war paint streaking his face, a Spencer carbine steady in his hands. 6 riders, he said, approaching from the south, military horses. This is not a courtesy call. As pale light crept over the land, warriors took defensive positions while women and children moved silently toward evacuation paths woven through the willows. Every movement spoke of preparation, of rehearsed survival. The riders broke through the morning mist like omens. At their head rode Vance Blackmore on a black stallion, sitting tall with the arrogance of a man accustomed to bending the frontier to his will. At 50, Blackmore still carried the thick frame of the mine laborer he once had been, though his tailored coat and polished boots betrayed the fortune he'd built through corruption. Riding close behind him was Sheriff Ward Hensley, pale eyes sweeping the camp with predatory calculation, followed by 4 members of the Iron Trace, their expressions promising blood at the first sign of resistance. Morning folks, Blackmore called, his voice loud and falsely cheerful. Apologies for disturbing your rest, but we've got urgent business to settle. Roken stepped forward, rifle held with relaxed certainty, and the standoff began. From the tall grass and cottonwood shadows, more warriors stepped into view as if drawn from the land itself. Iris counted at least 8 Apache fighters in plain sight, though she was certain others remained unseen, watching from cover. The air tightened with the quiet certainty of men prepared to defend their ground. This is Apache land, Roken said evenly. State your purpose, then leave in peace. Sheriff Ward Hensley's hand drifted toward the revolver at his hip. Not Apache land, boy. This is Dakota Territory under the lawful authority of the United States government, which means me. He shifted in his saddle, eyes sweeping the camp. And that authority says you people need to clear out. Vance Blackmore spoke next, his voice smooth, almost courteous, yet cold as river ice. I'm expanding my mining operations. This lake sits exactly where my new processing facility needs to be. The meaning struck Iris like a blow. This was never just about stolen documents. Blackmore intended to seize Shadow Lake itself, its water, its land, its silence. With the Apache forced out, and Iris erased, nothing would stop him from poisoning the region unchecked. The lake belongs to all living beings, said Tova the elder warrior. His silver-braided hair marked a lifetime of survival. We take only what is needed. We destroy nothing. Hensley snorted. That's real poetic, old man, but poetry doesn't rewrite territorial law. He produced a rolled paper from his saddlebag. Got myself a writ from Judge Corbin Slate. Grants authority to remove squatters and vagrants from public land. Iris noticed how he angled the document just enough to obscure its contents. Whether forged or deliberately vague, it hardly mattered. Out here, law bowed to gun barrels. And there's more, Blackmore added calmly. Stolen property. Someone broke into my office and took confidential business records. I have reason to believe the thief may be hiding among your guests. His gaze locked onto Iris. Cold, calculating, the look of a man accustomed to crushing obstacles. I don't know what you're talking about, Iris said, stepping forward, despite Roken's hand tightening on her arm. Blackmore smiled. Too wide. Of course you don't, my dear. But just to be thorough, Sheriff Hensley here has warrants to search any place stolen goods might be concealed. Hensley produced another paper stamped with an official-looking seal. Iris Calder, wanted for questioning related to theft and destruction of private property, also vagrancy. and public disorder seeing as you lack legal male guardianship." The words landed like fists. Under territorial law, an unmarried woman stood dangerously unprotected. If taken back to town, Iris could vanish into a cell while Blackmore erased the last traces of evidence. "She is under the protection of the Red Hollow Circle," Rokan said, stepping fully beside her. "As is anyone who seeks shelter here." Hensley laughed sharply. "You threatening a lawman, boy? That's a hanging offense in civilized territory." "This is not civilized territory," Rokan replied, his voice calm and lethal. "This is where honest people stand against corruption and murder." The moment balanced on a blade's edge. Guns numbers resolve, everything was being weighed. Iris felt the crushing responsibility settle on her. Children's lives depended on what happened next. Before she could speak, Blackmore raised a hand, casual, commanding. "Let's be sensible," he said. "I'm a businessman, not a killer. Miss Calder comes back to town, answers a few questions about my missing documents, and no one gets hurt. You people pack up, find another place to camp, and everyone walks away." "And if we refuse?" Tova asked quietly. Blackmore's smile never faltered, but something final entered his eyes. "Then Sheriff Hensley may need to notify Fort Abraham Lincoln about hostile Apache activity threatening peaceful settlers." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a warning fire. One telegram. That was all it would take to bring cavalry down upon the lake. Iris looked around the camp, women who had fed her children, who trusted her people, who had given her shelter when she had none. Small faces peeked from behind skirts, old enough to understand that decisions were being made that would shape their lives. "I'll go with you," she said softly. "No," Rokan said at once. She turned to him, memorizing the strength of his face, the steady darkness of his eyes. "Don't let my fight become your people's war." Pain flickered across his expression as he struggled with the truth of her words. The warrior's instinct clashed violently with the weight of leadership. Rokan was responsible for more than his own honor. The elders trusted his judgment. The children depended on his restraint and wisdom. At last, the burden of command forced his shoulders to sink just slightly. "This isn't over, Blackmore," he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "Of course not," Vance Blackmore replied smoothly. "Business is never over." He motioned to Sheriff Ward Hensley, who stepped forward, iron shackles glinting as they caught the light. "Just delayed," Blackmore added, "until we sort through a few legal inconveniences." Cold metal snapped shut around Iris Calder's wrists. As the cuffs locked, she lifted her head and caught one final look at Rokan. Fury burned in his eyes. So did grief. But beneath it all, she saw something else: respect. She had chosen sacrifice over bloodshed, protection of the innocent over her own freedom. It was the first truly brave choice she had ever made. The Willow Springs jail squatted at the end of Main Street like a festering wound. Its stone walls were blackened by decades of prairie wind and human despair. Iris's cell was a narrow box with a straw mattress that stank of old failures and a single barred window that offered nothing but empty sky. Sheriff Hensley deposited her inside with open satisfaction, making a show of hanging the keys just out of reach. "Comfortable quarters, Miss Calder," he sneered. "Or should I say Mrs. Nobody? Seeing how your husband saw fit to erase your obligations," Iris kept her face blank. Men like Hensley fed on reactions. Deny them, and they starved. Now he continued, settling into his chair like a small tyrant boots on the desk. "This situation doesn't have to last. Mercedes Blackmore is a reasonable man. Sign over that useless swamp land you own by the lake. Settle your back taxes and penalties, and you walk free." The fraud was obvious. The land was worthless for farming, but vital for Blackmore's expansion. More importantly, Iris's legal ownership gave her standing to challenge him in territorial court if she lived long enough. "What back taxes?" she asked quietly. Hensley opened a ledger with theatrical care. Property taxes for 1880 and 1881. late penalties, administrative fees, charges for disturbing the peace. Comes to $237 plus interest. It was impossible, more than she could earn in 3 honest years. He knew it. This was theater meant to dress robbery in the costume of law. "I'll need time to consider," Iris said evenly. Hensley grinned. "You've got till sundown." 2 days later, hoofbeats shattered the morning silence. Through the bars, Iris saw a gathering of riders, Rokan, several Apache warriors, Bram Holden, Dr. Alton Greaves, and townsmen she recognized from Willow Springs. Afternoon. Sheriff Bram called as they dismounted. "We need to discuss Shadow Lake." Hensley appeared in the doorway, hand hovering near his revolver despite being outnumbered. "This is highly irregular. You can't ride in here making demands." "We're not making demands," Dr. Greaves said calmly. "We're presenting evidence of criminal activity and requesting immediate territorial action." From his saddlebag, Bram produced the black ledger Iris remembered from Blackmore's office, recovered during a raid she'd never seen. Its pages detailed systematic environmental destruction and official corruption, financial records proving deliberate mercury poisoning of water sources. Medical testimony from the Ashwater widows, Dr. Greaves continued. Symptoms consistent with heavy metal contamination. Witness statements confirming intentional poisoning of public water. Hensley's face flushed. "You don't have the authority, actually," Greaves said, producing a sealed envelope. "We do. Federal warrants from the Territory Marshal Service. Investigation into environmental crimes and official corruption. Deputy Ellis Rowe is already en route from the capital with full authority." Iris felt her chest tighten as understanding struck. While she'd been locked away, Rokan and the others had built an airtight case, one that went far beyond her stolen documents. They had turned to Blackmore's own records against him. Then the ground trembled. A low rumble rolled across the prairie, followed by towering plumes of black smoke rising from Copper Gulch. "He's destroying the evidence," Iris whispered, dread flooding through her. And she knew this was far from over. Everything the federal investigators had not yet seized was going up in smoke. Through drifting ash and confusion, Iris Calder saw armed riders charging toward town at a reckless gallop. Vance Blackmore rode at the front, his face smeared with soot, his tailored coat ripped and stained the polish of wealth, stripped away by desperation. Behind him thundered what remained of the iron trace rifles, ready, riding hard toward a final reckoning that would decide the fate of Shadow Lake. The territorial deputy marshal arrived precisely when the telegraph had promised. He rode a government horse and carried leather dispatch cases, stamped with unmistakable federal seals. Deputy Ellis Rowe looked no older than 28, with the earnest expression of a man who still believed in the Constitution and equal justice. Sheriff Hensley Rowe announced as he dismounted, "I have communications from the Territory Marshal Service regarding your reports of Apache disturbances and mining disputes." Sheriff Ward Hensley lifted his head from the whiskey he'd been sharing with Blackmore. Both men stiffened at once. This was not the response they had expected. They had anticipated cavalry support, soldiers, not scrutiny. "About time," Hensley muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "We've got ourselves a full-scale uprising here, Deputy. Attacks on lawful business, theft of private property, threats against peaceful citizens." Rowe opened his documents with measured precision. "Yes, sir. I've reviewed your reports. I've also reviewed additional materials uncovered during our preliminary investigation." He produced a stack of official papers, each bearing seals and signatures that spoke of unquestionable federal authority. Iris pressed her face against the iron bars, straining to catch every word that might decide her fate. "Water quality assessments from the Territorial Health Commission," Rowe continued. "Chemical testing from Shadow Lake and surrounding sources. The mercury contamination levels are 43 times above federal safety limits." Blackmore's face remained controlled, but Iris noticed how his fingers tightened around his glass. "Any contamination would be minimal," Blackmore said evenly. well within acceptable limits for industrial operations. Respectfully, sir, Rowe replied, his tone calm and clinical. The recorded levels are sufficient to cause reproductive failure, neurological damage, and death. He reached into his case again. We also have this. Bram Holden's black ledger, now tagged and annotated as evidence, was laid bare. Financial records detailing systematic corruption among local officials, including payments made to conceal environmental violations. And further, Rowe said, we have sworn medical testimony from the Ashwater widows, 17 women describing symptoms consistent with mercury poisoning. The geographic spread and pattern of illness indicate deliberate contamination. Tears stung Iris's eyes as the full scope of what Dr. Alton Greaves and the others had accomplished became clear. They had built a case so thorough it transformed her from criminal to witness, from accused thief to whistleblower, exposing crimes of staggering scale. And finally, Rowe said, his voice shifting into formal legal cadence, we have sworn statements regarding intimidation, unlawful imprisonment, and the corruption of territorial officials used to suppress these crimes. As the charges stacked higher, each one capable of destroying Blackmore's empire and sending him to federal prison, Iris noticed something deeply unsettling. Bram Holden stood slightly apart, avoiding everyone's gaze. His posture was wrong, tight, coiled, burdened with something unspoken. Before she could make sense of it, gunfire cracked from the hills above Copper Gulch. Flames leapt skyward as controlled explosions ripped through the mining complex. Even from her cell window, Iris could see it clearly. Someone was erasing evidence with methodical precision. The final fight for Shadow Lake has begun, she whispered, dread tightening her chest. That night, the storm that tore across Dakota Territory felt biblical in its fury, as if the land itself had risen to purge. The poison sunk into its bones. Lightning split the sky. Thunder shook the jail's foundations. Rain fell in sheets, turning streets into rivers within minutes. Deputy Rowe released Iris that afternoon, dismissing federal charges as part of his expanding investigation. But freedom brought its own terror. Blackmore was still loose, still armed, still capable of one last devastating act. Through the storm, Iris saw lantern lights moving along the hills of Copper Gulch. Far too many, far too deliberate for ordinary mining work. These aren't evacuations, Dr. Greaves said grimly, joining her at the window as fresh explosions lit the sky. They're setting demolition charges. They're not just destroying records, Iris breathed. No, Greaves replied. Those placements are designed to collapse the dam. Ice flooded her veins as the truth struck. If Shadow Lake's dam fails in this storm, she said, voice hollow, the entire valley floods. The town, Greaves continued. The Apache camp, everything downstream, and Blackmore will call it an act of nature, Iris whispered. Blame it on the storm or sabotage. The realization hit her like a blow to the chest. This was no escape plan. It was annihilation. Vance Blackmore was not merely erasing evidence anymore. He was preparing to erase witnesses. A flood, Iris Calder said, urgently, already reaching for her coat. He's going to drown everyone who can testify. We have to warn them. No, someone shouted behind her. Iris, stop. That storm will kill you, and Blackmore's men will gun down anyone who interferes. But Iris was already moving her thoughts, racing faster than her feet. The main road to Shadow Lake would be watched, bristling with rifles, but the land held other routes. Narrow deer paths wound through the Willows Creek beds, hidden corridors even rain could not fully erase. Then we give him what he expects, she said over her shoulder. But not the way he expects it. The storm swallowed her whole. Rain fell in blinding sheets, shrinking the world to a few feet ahead. Wind tore through the cottonwoods hard enough to stagger a grown person. Mud sucked at her boots as Iris pressed on, moving like a shadow, along trails she had learned during her short time among the Apache. She was still half a mile from the lake when shapes emerged through the rain. Rokan and 3 Apache warriors cutting through the darkness toward the same destination. Their faces were marked for war weapons, gleaming whenever lightning ripped the sky open. "You shouldn't be here," Rokan said, his voice firm but edged with relief rather than anger. "Blackmore means to destroy the dam." Water streamed from Iris's hair as she gasped for breath. "He's planning a flood, one that will kill everyone who can speak against him." "We know," Rokan replied. "Bram Holden reached our camp an hour ago." His jaw tightened as he pointed toward distant lantern lights. "But it's worse than that." Iris's heart clenched. The children, Rokan nodded. "Taken from the camp. They were gathering late berries when Blackmore's men found them." "He has them at the dam," Rokan continued grimly, "threatening to kill them if we interfere." The word struck Iris like a blow. Nilo, barely 7 years old, alone in the world, had clung to her from the moment they met. The thought of him bound and used as leverage ignited a fury that burned through fear. "There's more," Rokan said. "Blackmore planted enough dynamite to not only collapse the dam, but create an explosion visible across 3 territories. He'll time it with the storm's peak and call it an act of nature." As they neared the site, the full scale of the plan came into view. Lanterns moved with disciplined precision around the dam, marking positions of men who had spent hours placing charges like soldiers on campaign. The structure itself groaned under the storm's pressure, water leaking through cracks, the spillway already roaring beyond safe limits. But it was the site near the control house that stole Iris's breath. Nilo and 2 other children sat bound in the mud, guarded by one of the iron trace, while Blackmore himself barked final orders. "When the charges go off," Rokan said quietly, "they die with everyone else unless we reach them first." Iris forced herself to study the ground, calculating angles and distances. The control mechanism sat inside a stone structure that might shield them from the blast, but reaching it meant crossing 50 yards of open ground under rifle fire. "There's another way," she said suddenly. Rokan turned. "What way?" "The spillway tunnel." "If we can get inside the dam," Iris continued, "we might disarm enough charges to stop a full collapse." It was madness. It could kill them all. But it was the only chance. "The tunnel entrance is on the far side," Rokan said, "away from the guards. But once we're inside, there's no retreat. If the charges go off while we're in there," Iris finished, "then we die trying to save lives instead of watching children be murdered." Rokan met her eyes. "Some things are worth that price." What followed was the most terrifying passage of Iris's life. They moved through storm-lashed darkness, slipping between bursts of gunfire as the explosions flashed across the sky. The tunnel mouth yawned before them, stone carved by men to tame water, now their only hope. Inside, the air was thick and wet, the roar of hidden channels echoing like distant thunder. Their steps rang too loud on slick rock. "The main charges are set at the foundation," Rokan whispered. "If we disable even half, the dam might hold long enough for evacuation." They had been working nearly 20 minutes, hands shaking as they disarmed explosives with tools stolen from Blackmore's own supply, when Iris heard footsteps behind them. Voices. She turned. Bram Holden stood at the tunnel entrance, rain dripping from his coat, flanked by 2 armed men she did not recognize. "That's far enough," Bram said coldly. Bram Holden raised his voice sharp and commanding, and the sound cut straight through Iris Calder like ice in her veins. "Step away from the charges. Drop your weapons. Now." The truth struck Iris with crushing force. In that instant, everything became clear. Bram's remorse, his confession, his supposed change of heart, it had all been a carefully staged lie, a performance meant to guide them straight into this trap. His loyalty had never wavered. It belonged to Vance Blackmore, to money, to poison poured into land and water. "You played the role well," Iris said, bitterly, lifting her hands as the men beside Bram leveled their rifles at them. "I had to," Bram answered coldly. "Blackmore needed you to trust me, needed you to bring your Apache allies into the open." Now, every problem he's had is standing right here about to be erased by a tragic mining accident. Rokan did not move. His face stayed calm, but Iris saw the weight in his eyes. He had chosen to trust Bram's testimony as a leader, and now his people would pay for that choice. The children, Iris said urgently, Nilo and the others, had nothing to do with this. Let them go. I'll tell you where we hid the rest of the evidence. Bram laughed, the sound sharp and brittle. Evidence, he scoffed. In 10 minutes, this dam turns to dust. The flood takes the mine, the Apache camp, half the town. No witnesses, no investigation. The ground trembled faintly beneath their boots, either thunder rolling closer or water building behind the weakened dam. Time was bleeding away. Move, Bram, ordered, motioning with his rifle toward the tunnel exit. Blackmore wants to see you before the end. They stepped out of the tunnel and into the storm's fury, and Iris found herself face to face with Vance Blackmore for the first time since fleeing his office. He stood near the dam's control house, rain plastering his coat to his frame, hair wild, his eyes burning with something unhinged. "Miss Calder," he said smoothly, "how kind of you to join us for tonight's spectacle." Around them, chaos simmered, just beneath control. The iron trace moved with urgency, setting final charges that would be heard across 3 territories. Nearby, the children crouched together, terror etched into faces too young to fully understand what awaited them. "Let them go," Iris said, pointing toward Nilo and the others. "They're innocent." Blackmore tilted his head, his voice turning patronizing. "Innocent," he said. "My dear, they are essential." Iris felt a cold deeper than the storm seep into her bones. "This was never about mining permits or regulations," Blackmore continued. "This was about justice." "Justice," Iris repeated. "My wife died 3 years ago," he said, his voice growing stronger, fueled by memory. "Fever took her while this so-called civilized territory, white men and Apache alike, did nothing." His eyes shone with unshed tears and fury. They had excuses. No medicine, too far to travel, other priorities. But the truth was simple: they let her die because she was married to a man who took wealth from the earth instead of stealing it from weaker neighbors. Because she didn't belong. Iris understood then. This wasn't a criminal scrambling to escape the law. This was vengeance cultivated over years. "So I returned the favor," Blackmore went on. "If they wouldn't save my family, I would make sure they couldn't save theirs. Mercury in the water, bribes to officials, systematic ruin. I wanted them to watch their children die the way I watched mine." The confession lingered like smoke over a pyre. Iris realized she stood before a man who had weaponized environmental destruction, murdering unborn children as revenge. And now, Blackmore said, satisfaction creeping into his voice, "I finish it. One flood, one cleansing, the Apache camp, the town, all of it washed away. Lightning tore the sky apart, freezing the scene in blinding white like a photograph pulled straight from hell." And in that instant, Iris saw them. Riders cutting through the storm. Not Blackmore's men, but figures coming fast from the direction of town. Hope surged through her chest as thunder crashed around them. Alton Greaves, Lydia Crowell, and more than a dozen other citizens of Willow Springs came on hard-armed and resolved men and women who had finally chosen to stand against lies, poison, and murder. But they were still too distant to stop what Vance Blackmore had already set in motion. The explosives were planted. The mechanisms were active. In less than 5 minutes, the dam would tear itself apart and unleash a flood that would drown hundreds who had never wronged him. Iris Calder took in everything at once. The children crouched together, Nilo shaking with fear. Rokan and his Apache warriors held at gunpoint. The riders closing in unaware they were charging straight into death. Clarity struck her like lightning. "You want justice," she shouted at Blackmore, her voice cutting through wind and rain. "Then settle this with me." The The storm seemed to pause around them. One fight, you and me. Winner decides everything. If you kill me, set off your charges and take your revenge. She stepped forward unflinching. But if I win, you stop this madness and face the law. Blackmore studied her eyes, narrowing. Around him, the iron trace shifted uneasily. Men hardened to violence, yet visibly shaken by the idea of slaughtering an entire valley. And why, Blackmore asked slowly. Would I keep such a promise? Because you don't see yourself as a butcher, Iris said, staking everything on the truth she saw in him. You believe you were wronged. You want the world to recognize your suffering as justice. She gestured toward the children. Killing them makes you a monster. Beating me makes you an avenger. Time stretched thin. At last Blackmore nodded, fingers curling around his revolver. So be it, Miss Calder. Let's see if your resolve is more than words. What followed was nothing like the clean duels of dime novels. It was chaos, mud-slick stone, blinding rain, lightning tearing the sky apart while thunder swallowed the crack of gunfire. Blackmore fired first. The shot grazed Iris's cheek as she dove behind a heap of mining gear. The second round smashed sparks from a boiler as she rolled clear behind a rusted steam engine. You can't hide, Blackmore called. My men will detonate the charges in 3 minutes, alive or dead. You're only delaying the end. She knew he meant it. Holding the small pistol Dr. Greaves had pressed into her hand earlier, Iris made her decision. Instead of running, she stood. She walked straight toward him. Rain streamed down her face. Her grip did not waver. The move caught him off guard just long enough. This ends now, she said, and fired. The bullet struck Blackmore square in the chest, spinning him sideways. His revolver flew into the darkness. He dropped to his knees, one hand clamped over the wound, the other clawing uselessly at wet stone. The charges, Iris said, dropping beside him. How do we stop them? Blackmore looked up, his eyes already dulling. For a heartbeat she thought he would die silent. Then he smiled. You can't, he whispered. I lied. Her stomach fell. They're tied to my pulse. When my heart stops, everything blows. Kill me, and you kill them all. The world reeled as the trap closed around her. His death meant catastrophe. Victory meant annihilation. Shouts broke through the storm closer now. The townspeople had reached the dam, spreading out under Dr. Greaves's shouted commands. Dr. Iris cried. The charges are linked to his heartbeat. If he dies, they detonate. Dr. Greaves was beside her in seconds, medical bag already open. When was he shot? Less than a minute. Greaves examined the wound, hand steady pressure applied. Maybe, he said grimly. The bullet missed his heart, but he's bleeding fast. We need surgery now. Around them, the fight for the dam tipped. Blackmore's men surrendered as the townspeople overran their positions. Rokan and the Apache warriors freed the children and rushed them toward safety. But none of it mattered if Blackmore died before the explosives could be disarmed. There's more, Bram Holden said, stepping forward with his hands raised in surrender. The timing device, Bram Holden said hoarsely. It isn't only linked to his pulse. It's also rigged to detonate if anyone interferes without following the correct order. Iris Calder stared at him, anger and urgency tightening her chest. What order? I don't know. Bram admitted, terror plain on his face. Blackmore never trusted anyone with the full sequence. He planned for betrayal. He swallowed hard. All I know is this: there's a secondary trigger. About 10 minutes from now, it activates on its own. The truth closed in around them. They couldn't let Vance Blackmore die. They couldn't kill him. And they couldn't disable the explosives without knowledge only he possessed. Hopeless. Then Iris looked down at the man who had poisoned water children and land, and something dangerous sparked in her mind. Keep him alive, she told Dr. Alton Greaves' voice sharp with resolve. No matter what. He cannot die for 10 minutes. Rising, she turned away. Where are you going? Rokan asked, rain streaking his face as the storm battered the dam. To finish this another way, Iris replied, already moving. If we can't stop the blast, we might be able to control it. The idea was reckless, almost suicidal. But as she studied the dam's massive structure, she saw what Blackmore hadn't: possibilities hidden within the stone and steel. The spillway system was built to survive violent spring floods. It had never faced explosive force, but it was designed to channel power, not absorb it. If she could redirect the blast through the spillway instead of the dam's foundation, the structure might endure long enough for evacuation. Working with frantic precision, Iris crawled through narrow spaces, shifting explosive charges from the base of the dam to positions that would drive force into the spillway tunnels instead of tearing the embankment apart. Water seeped through cracked stone. Wind roared overhead. Every movement risked death. 60 seconds, Dr. Greaves shouted from behind her hands, still working to keep Blackmore's heart beating. Iris made the final connection, then ran. She burst from the spillway tunnel as Greaves's voice cut through the storm. 10 seconds. Men scattered for high ground. Others clung to rock and machinery, bracing for impact. Iris stumbled into Rokan's arms. He pulled her close, shielding her with his body as they faced the end together. The explosion tore the night apart. The earth bucked beneath them. Fire and debris blasted skyward, vanishing into storm clouds. The sound was more than noise. It was force slamming, breath from lungs and rattling bone. And then the dam held. Water thundered through the shattered spillway in violent torrents, but the foundation stood. The flood surged fast and wide, but it was survivable. Dawn revealed the aftermath. From the ridge above Copper Gulch, Iris stood beside Rokan, watching muddy water drain away. The mining complex was gone, scoured from the earth. Vance Blackmore lay unconscious in Dr. Greaves's makeshift field hospital, guarded by the Territory Marshal Service. "It's over," Iris said quietly. Rokan nodded. "The fight is. The healing will take years." She understood. Courts would drag on. Poisoned land would take decades to recover. Corruption never vanished, it waited. But across the valley at the Apache camp, children laughed and splashed in retreating floodwater. Hope stirred. The trials concluded just before Christmas. Vance Blackmore was convicted of environmental destruction, conspiracy to commit mass murder, and systematic corruption of territorial officials. His confession, given while recovering from his wound, led to sweeping removals across the territory. Bram Holden received a reduced sentence for his testimony, though Iris doubted he would ever escape the weight of his betrayal. Sheriff Ward Hensley and Judge Corbin Slate faced justice of their own. For Iris, the most meaningful victory was not legal. A federal compensation fund was established for victims of mercury poisoning, formal recognition that the Ashwater widows had been harmed, not barren. By spring, Shadow Lake ran clear again. Fish returned. Wildflowers followed. And for the first time in years, Iris Calder believed the future might finally be clean. Wildlife slowly reclaimed the land once poisoned. Birds nested again along the shoreline, and the air itself seemed lighter now that the smoke from Vance Blackmore's operations no longer stained the sky. In the small cabin Iris Calder now shared with Nilo, she began to notice changes within her own body. Subtle at first, then undeniable. When Dr. Alton Greaves confirmed it, she was not surprised. Months of clean water, steady nourishment, and a life no longer ruled by fear had allowed her body to heal. "You see," she told Rokan one warm evening in late May, "there was never anything wrong with me, just poison." And time fixed what cruelty broke. The wedding took place in midsummer beside Shadow Lake, where water now reflected the sky like polished glass. People from both communities gathered, Apache families standing alongside townsfolk who a year earlier would never have shared the same ground. Lydia Crowell stood as matron of honor. Karen, long believed dead and returned with spring, served as Rokan's best man. The ceremony wove traditions together in ways once thought impossible. Christian vows were spoken in English. Apache prayers honored the four directions. Music followed fiddles and drums, sharing the same rhythm beneath the open sky. As Iris stood beside Rokan beneath the stars, she felt the difference. Her first marriage had been surrender. This was choice. This was beginning. The schoolhouse they built soon drew children from across the territory. Apache students learned letters and numbers without losing their stories or songs. White children discovered intelligence and dignity in classmates they had been taught to fear. When winter came and Iris's pregnancy entered its final months, she stood at the schoolhouse window watching children of both worlds build snow forts together. One hand rested on her belly. In the other she held Nilo's newest drawing, a family by the lake, the baby already included. The child would be born in spring, when the ice broke and birds returned. He or she would grow up where water ran clean, where children learned side by side, where past wrongs were remembered, but not allowed to poison what came next. No magic, Iris whispered, watching Apache and white children laugh together. Just love, work, and refusing to let hatred win. Behind her, the school filled with voices, English and Apache, braided together into something hopeful. Outside Shadow Lake mirrored the wide Dakota sky, clearer than it had been in a generation. As Iris prepared to call the children in, a rider appeared on the road from town. His posture and the dispatch case on his saddle spoke of official business. Deputy Ellis Rowe dismounted and handed her documents marked with federal seals. As she read, tears filled her eyes. New environmental standards were being established across the territories. Shadow Lake would become a case study for preventing future crimes. The compensation fund was expanding. Other poisoned communities would be recognized at last. The Ashwater Widows, Rowe explained, are officially acknowledged as victims of deliberate poisoning. New laws are in place so this never happens again. When he rode away, Iris felt something settle at last. What began as a desperate theft had become lasting change. That evening, the sunset painted Shadow Lake in gold and crimson. Iris sat beside Rokan on their porch. Inside, Nalo practiced his letters, while their unborn child stirred gently within her. "It's finished," she said softly, leaning against her husband. "This fight is—" Rokan agreed. "There will be others." She nodded. The school would grow. The community would face new trials. There would always be those who profited from suffering. But tonight was enough. She listened to Nilo recite his lessons and felt the steady strength of new life within her. She had found her place not as the broken woman she once believed herself to be, but as a teacher, a mother, and a defender of justice when justice was required. Stars filled the vast Dakota sky. Laughter drifted from the settlement. Apache and English voices mingled in the shared language of play. Tomorrow would bring new lessons, new bridges to build. But tonight, Iris Calder, wife of Rokan, was simply a woman rich beyond measure, counting her wealth in clean water, healthy children, and a love chosen freely. It was enough. It was everything. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voiceover, visual scripts, as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work.